This is the voice of munication.com. Emotional Mind Control. Written by ChaosSystem. Posted on December 7, 2013. This has been a practice of master manipulators throughout the ages. Many of those manipulated would have never realized such is the effectiveness of this simple technique and its application. People can be turned against others individually or as groups, as long as they have some common identity/cause to bind them together. We see nations have practiced these techniques against their populace. They have made the task easier by setting up group ideals, ideologies and identifiers. People identify with their nationalities because of this. People identify with their race over others because of this drive to group people to make them more manipulable. As long as any group of people have some common point of mental connection or affiliation, they can be turned against any other. When you have never met or encountered another target group, it is easier to influence you against this target group. When you have been rejected or spurned by a target group, it is easier again. In the first instance, we see how nations can whip up hatred of another nationality, race or religion using this technique. An incident which provokes emotions is created or cited. If the incident affects a member of the group, it will cause an emotional response from the whole group. This can then be used to circumflex program loader people to create an unthinking automatic responses as desired. The examples of these are well known and famous. Iraqi troops entering a children's hospital and disconnecting all the equipment as well as killing children. Later found to be false and a military psy-op where the girl who related the incident was paid to do so to emotionally provoke people against the Iraqi regime and military. Thousands of graves of Muslims in Serbia/Croatia. Once again faked and exaggerated beyond all proportion, but it did create an enemy in the eyes of the people to justify an incursion into another sovereign nation. Gulf of Tonkin incident. Once again falsely reported and a created incident to justify what had already been decided. Pearl Harbor. The Japanese codes had already been cracked and both Churchill and Roosevelt knew the attack was coming and would provoke such an emotional reaction from the US people they would get behind the war. It was allowed to happen deliberately, as was the orders to send out the carriers so they would be intact afterwards. Taliban atrocities. While some did occur, most were fabrications by the US military operating through one of their psy-ops weapons, the US media. Just as in Kosovo, much of the circumflex news shown was acted and constructed by specialist media agencies which are tasked with creating news. This was also the method during Gulf War I and II, with embedded reported just being the psy-ops crews creating the desired impressions for the public back home. 9/11. Whether the events was a genuine act of terrorism or a creation of the US military and associated corporations, the incident was used to demonize and justify the target. Muslims and terrorists were linked together until most could not separate the two, as well as the target countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Syrian gas attacks. We have found these to not be the work of the Syrian government as the media was informed to report. Later it was obvious it was a staged/created incident done by troops the US had been training covertly. While this did not get the US military openly on the field in Syria, it was driven towards that agenda. Not all such incidents are created, some are allowed to happen, and many insiders are known for remarking a circumflex never let a crisis go to waste. Some are just an opportune moment to implement the strategy that had been previously decided. How the technique works in practice is to create or use the emotional response. When people are emotional, they are not fully rational and critical thinking is impaired. In this mental state the program loading occurs. Whatever message that is to be inserted into the minds of those affected settles deep and does not get the usual thorough processing of the conscious filters and applied critical thinking. This acts as a hypnotic suggestion to varying degrees of success within the targeted population/group. For those for whom the suggestion was not deep set, more emotional provocation is repeated along with the message. Muslim terrorists deliberately crashed hijacked aircraft into the Twin Towers, killing over 3,000 people. With pictures to make sure you are emotionally provoked and traumatized. Chinese government uses slave labor to destroy US manufacturing. They hate us for our freedoms. The USSR is the evil empire, says former President of the USA, Ronald Reagan. Iraq and North Korea are part of the axis of evil, says former President of the USA, George W. Bush. Lunatic outpost has no freedom and censors people. We can see how the technique works until people are left reacting without thinking. It works from great to small, from nations to websites. In the forum wars that have occurred, we see some forum admins influencing their members using just these techniques. By identifying something which irritated people, it could be used to create emotional provocation. Then the program loading was applied. A circumflex, there is no freedom there. They are taking away your right to say what you want to. By using a common target group with the same identifiers, Americans, they could be convinced they were being picked on and thus emotionally provoked. By revisiting this emotional provocation repeatedly along with the same messages, a group of people is able to be turned against another. Given sufficient time, the victims will be suffering from essentially deep hypnotic suggestion from which they will have difficulty escaping. The technique is no different on the larger scale. Americans were turned against Iraqis, which were dehumanized and stereotyped where possible. The same process occurred with Vietnam. It was not until they were seen to be people who were suffering that the programming was able to be broken. When people are rejected from one group, it leaves them vulnerable to be turned against that group if they have not already done so. The people who recruit young kids to be skinheads or neo-Nazis understand the vulnerability of people who feel they are not part of the larger group. By just showing some basic kindness, they draw these young kids in who have been rejected by others and even their own families. By emphasizing the rejection of outsiders, group loyalty is created and strengthened. When opposition is shown towards the group loyalty is made even stronger. Once you understand what emotional programming is about, you realize it is being used in society at many levels, from governmental to domestic. Some people are masters of manipulating others. They make great salesmen and have the gift of seeming genuine when they are not. Great politicians have this skill. They seduce people, bending them to their will with their oratory skills. Once believed, they have almost total power over their followers. Next time you are emotionally provoked by the media or some individual, take a moment to see if they are deliberately trying to take advantage of you. End of the transmission. Come follow us on munication.com.